Recording. Right. Greetings, Michael from London. Excellent. Good to have you. We're just about to start. I think I'll mute everyone while I do the opening. Yeah, I'll mute everyone. Ed, perhaps you're not familiar with a Moot, and also people that have not been here before. I customarily start this with a few words, a couple of verses from the Edda in Old Norse, looking north, a couple of words in English, and I light a candle, and then I'll just briefly introduce the subject. Jag speak alla helga kindier, nere och minni, möger hindallar. Eldkväll, så helgkvällsinier, hel natt och nytt. Jag röger magen mycket saker sinig, och gevit sitt jondum stiger. Helig ej sig alla avsinniga hälsa av informade beford. Mal och manligt givet, för magnetron, och lightningshanden of the river. Flame is quickened by flame. A man from another man may become wiser, but from conceit may remain ignorant. Truth, like the sky, is above and beyond us all. Gods of our peoples and lands, may we spend this time together in friendship with you and with each other, and use it to the common good with profit and with pleasure. Hail, Odin. To live in accordance with nature may be said to be one of the principal precepts of the classical pagan tradition, especially as one finds it enunciated in the meditations of Marcus Aurelius. And if I may speak personally, in matters of religious belief and in religious practice, my precept is empiricism in all things, that true tradition is discovered by exhaustive empiricism. Our sense of divinity has emerged within the created order and is cognate with it. Therefore, the study of any text is not necessarily more valuable than the study of reality itself, any text being helpful only in as much as it helps us better understand the reality we find ourselves in, and in as much as it guides us in drawing conclusions from it and acting upon them. The anthropology of religion, which is one of Professor Dutton's fields of research, can contribute, I believe, to this understanding alongside the insight of the inspired heart. He has written about the progressive sinking of intelligence over the last century or so, as measured by IQ tests, and also about the heritability of what IQ tests measure. If it is one of our individual and collective duties to learn more about the world and become wiser, and our capacity to do so is limited by our intelligence, these are matters we have a duty to draw our attention towards. Lord Odin is a deity who seeks knowledge and who sacrifices himself of his own free will to that end. Understanding the genome is, in a sense, a communing with the dead. Therefore, the scientific project in which Ed is a participant, may one argue, is not fully consistent with, also true with pagan tradition, but may be thought of as an expression of its courageous questioning for truth. With that somewhat grandiloquent introduction, I now warmly invite Edward to speak. Please, sir, if you could unmute and yeah, can you unmute, Edward?
Yes. Okay. Hello. Hello. Well, thank you for having me here. This is the This is one of the first Zoom calls I've ever done. So I know that it's a big part of lots of other people's lives because they don't work from home normally, but I work from home normally. So I don't do many of these Zoom calls. My wife does a lot of them, but I don't do many of these Zoom calls. So I haven't done many of this. I have, however, been to some pagan meetings before, although they perhaps wouldn't be the kind of pagan meetings that were familiar to you. So over 20 years ago, I was a theology student at Durham University, and I lived in college in my first year, and in my second year, you arranged to live out somewhere in the city. And I had a sort of I don't know if you'd call it a girlfriend, but a sort of, I don't know, an on-off thing with this particular girl. And we arranged to live together. This is in the first year with two other girls. And by the beginning of the second year, when we had to start living together in a house in Durham, it all fell apart. And so I wanted to leave. And so I had a friend who had a spare room, and I had who was a pagan, who was a practicing Wicca, a girl who did a history degree. And I had another friend who was fundamentalist Christians who had a spare room and who were friends of mine, said, come and live with us. And for some reason, I didn't like the idea of living with fundamentalist Christians. So I took up the offer to go and live with this pagan girl and her two housemates who were who were a lesbian couple who were Wiccan. And so I was familiar with the goings on of that house. There was constant Wiccan lesbian ceremonies happening. And my fundamentalist Christian friends were so concerned about it. My birthday is the 30th of October. And they insisted that I not stay the night there on the 31st of October in case devils manifested or whatever. And it was all, they were perfectly charming people, these lesbian witches. But in the end, I realized I should have taken up my fundamentalist Christian friends' offer to live with them. And that's what I did. Now, in the end, those lesbian witches, one of those lesbian witches, by the end of the second year, started to become rather androgynous. And weirdly, she was the femme one. She was the effeminate of the two. But she started to become increasingly androgynous. And round about the same time, there was an Old Testament lecture. And the Old Testament lecturer was trying to explain to us just what life was like at the time of the Old Testament. And he said, well, everyone stand up. And then he said, okay, well, you'd have died if this is a child. You'd have died if this is a child. And he carried on like this until half of us were sitting down. And it was in order to hammer home to us the prevalence of child mortality as it existed before the Industrial Revolution, when the child mortality was about 50%. Now, of course, it's collapsed down to 1%. But the crucible of evolution was child mortality. Every generation, children would be born, and only the genetically fittest children would survive. And the fittest children, those that didn't survive, would have mutations of the body, meaning that they would have an insufficiently good immune system, meaning that they would die of various childhood diseases or whatever. And so you end up with this 50% child mortality, or something like that, 40%, 50% overall. And now with the Industrial Revolution, of course, this collapsed because the Industrial Revolution meant that you had better sanitation, you had better medicine, you had inoculations, you had all of this kind of stuff. And so child mortality gradually ceased to be the crucible of evolution. It went down to 1%. Now, what this meant was that we are now in a situation where a large percentage of society wouldn't be alive under harsh Darwinian conditions. And the brain is something like 80% or something like that of the genome and this means that if you have, it's a massive target for mutation. And this means that if you have mutations of the body, you will have mutations of the mind that will make you maladaptive or will make you less able to survive under those harsh conditions that previously existed. So what we would expect would be a buildup of people that would be less able to survive under those harsh conditions. And this is consistent with the fact that, well, I'll look at later, of some of the correlates of, being an individualist. Now, when this happened, this Old Testament lecture, she was this woman, this girl, was becoming increasingly androgynous, and then she eventually, years later, I discovered she became a man. And we got back in touch on Facebook, and suddenly this person was overtly male. but was also implying that he or she had a vagina, which I found was odd, because I thought, well, how could you be a male and have a vagina? And she said to me that to even ask that question of what do you mean by a man was like asking someone who had been raped, what do you mean by rape? And I thought that was rather odd, and it was a way of sort of shutting down discussion, and I didn't like that. And this wokeness, you see, that was only just starting when I was at university in the year 2000. It was only just beginning. I only first heard the phrase safe space in 2001. I only heard of transsexuals or whatever and met them when I got there. It was just beginning. It wasn't anything like as powerful as it is now. And what I want to look at today is the idea that there were two crucibles to evolution under these harsh Darwinian selection pressures that existed until 1800. One was, of course, child mortality, and the other was warfare. We were competing for resources, therefore we were competing for resources at the group level. And the groups that were higher in positive and negative ethnocentrism, that is to say internal cooperation and external violence, or the groups that were more intelligent and could produce better weapons, they would tend to win over the other groups and expand at their expense. So the crucibles of evolution were child mortality and warfare. And I would like to suggest that this has now changed. And the crucible of evolution is not warfare, it is wokefare. Wokeness is the new crucible of evolution. And whereas our ancestors, who instead invoked earlier, speaking in Norse and doing the rituals that our ancestors did, they had to go through appalling suffering. They had to go through the suffering of losing children, of losing sons in battles, of dying young before they could fulfill their potential, all of these awful things, which we don't have to go through. On the plus side, they lived in what we might call an evolutionary match. They lived in the way that the human animal is evolved to live, because they were closer to how we are adapted to live. They were living in families with people who were genetically similar to them. They were living in a situation in which the evolved sex roles, which we have evolved over time, were what you lived according to and what were carried out. It could be argued that we are evolved to patriarchy. It could be argued that a group that is high in positive and negative ethnocentrism, which wins the battle of group selection, if it introduces patriarchy and the control of females, then you get less intermale violence, because men are worried about what their women are doing and whether they're going to be cuckolded. So you get more intermale cooperation. And so therefore the group that is patriarchal and to some extent controls female sexuality will be more group selected. And they lived, and therefore women that are prepared to absorb and follow and accept these patriarchal norms will be more selected for. And those that will not will be selected out and will not get high status husbands under conditions in which until the Industrial Revolution, the richer 50% of the population had about double the surviving children as the poorer 50%. So this means that they're living in an evolutionary match in terms of patriarchy. They're living in an evolutionary match in terms of being with people of their own ethnic group. In a book by E.O. Wilson that was published about 10 years ago, he notes that when people see people who are of a different ethnic group, the part of their brain associated with fear lights up, even if they're not conscious of it. And the reason for this is because, of course, it makes sense in group selection to be evolved to fear those who are of a very different group because they have different genetic interests from you. They are in an evolutionary match in that sense. They are in an evolutionary match in the sense that there's a clear structure to the world and there's a sense of right and wrong. They are in an evolutionary match in the sense that it could be argued that we are evolved to some extent to be religious. This is evidenced in the fact that religiousness is a universal, religiousness is associated with fertility, religiousness is associated with mental health, religiousness is associated with physical health, religiousness is associated with pro-social personality, religiousness is between about 0.3 and 0.7 heritable. There are specific parts of the brain that are associated with it. It seems to correlate with positive and negative ethnocentrism. And so there's every reason to think that it is adaptive. And they were in that environment. There's some priming research that has shown that being in a religious environment makes people happier and makes people more pro-social. So they were having a horrible time in terms of losing children. That was the thing that was the evolutionary, that was the thing that was the crucible of evolution. That was a horrible thing for them. But they were probably happier than us because they were living in an evolutionary match. And okay, they lost children, but when you're high in stress and mortality salience, you become religious. And so you strongly believe that your life has eternal meaning and that all will be okay in the end. Now, we are in a very different situation now. We are in a situation where the child mortality rate has collapsed down to about 1% from about 40% or 50%. And in which, therefore, there has been a build-up of all of these people who wouldn't have survived under harsh Darwinian conditions of group selection. And I suggest that those people are more likely to be individualists, because under group selection, yes, you have a balance between individualizing foundations. As individuals, we climb up the group by being concerned with equality and harm avoidance. These are individualizing foundations. And as a group, we need to be concerned with authority and obedience and sanctity and things like that. These are group binding foundations. And a balance can be held between the two under these conditions of group selection. If group selection collapses, which it has, and if these harsh fitness Darwinian selection pressures reduce, which they have, then what you can expect, right, is at the genetic level, you're going to get more and more and more people who are going to deviate from what was the norm under harsh levels of Darwinian selection. And it seems that what the norm was people that were highly group-oriented, highly group-selected, high in these binding values. And so you'll get more and more people that are high in these individualizing values. And there is a tendency for group-oriented people to give way to individualists because there are these 5 moral foundations, that is to say sanctity, obedience to authority, a sort of structure, and then the individualistic foundations of harm avoidance and equality. Now, people that are right-wing, they have all of these foundations. And they're about equal in all of them. The people that are left-wing have the individualizing values very strongly and are very weak in the other 3. And the result of that is that the left can empathize with the right. Sorry, the right can empathize with the left, but the left finds it hard to empathize with the right. And the result of that is that things will tend to push in a left-wing direction, in an individualistic direction, unless there is something to stop that happening. And what would have stopped it happening would have been 2 things. Group selection pressure, i.e. if you become too individualistic, your group will be destroyed, and people will be aware that if you become too individualistic, a group will be destroyed, and they will stop you, 1. And 2, the fact that a certain number of people will be strongly evolved to be highly group-oriented. Now, as they reduce as a percentage of the population, and as there is no external group selection pressure, what you would expect is runaway individualism. And that's what we see today. So we have a situation where there is nothing more important than individualistic values of harm avoidance and of equality. And then you would have had a tipping point. This may have come in the 1960s, when a certain percentage of the population were highly individualistic for genetic reasons, for environmental reasons, for a combination of the 2. And the society would have tipped over towards their way of thinking, because this is what happens when about 20 or 25% of people take a certain view. And then that would mean that that would be the way of thinking. When that happens, more intelligent people, they're better at sort of sniffing the air and realizing what the dominant ideology is and persuading themselves to adopt it, adopting it, and then competing for status by pushing it in a slightly more extreme direction. And thus the intelligent become more individualistic, and we get runaway individualism. And this gradually creates a total dysphoria. And this is the dysphoria that we have today. where the first problem that you have, I mean, well, this is even earlier, is simply living in cities. We're not supposed to live in cities. We're not supposed to have all of our needs satisfied. We're evolved to be on edge. We're evolved to be kind of instinctive and to be in touch with our instincts, which we are when we're high in stress and mortality salience. And this makes us, have something to live for and strive for. Take that away and give us everything we want, and you have a dysphoria. We're not evolved to live like that, to have all our needs satisfied. And when they are, we become very low in stress. We thus stop believing in the religion. The religion takes adaptive values like passing on your genes and doing good for your group and makes those the will of God. We stop believing in that. We stop being in touch with our instincts, such as to pass on our genes or whatever, and we start becoming decadent, and we stop having children. And then children become a product of an accident, i.e. they're associated with stupidity and the inability to use contraception, and intelligence goes down. Now, that's always happened, but that's happened with the Greeks, the Romans in Baghdad. But it's a bit worse with us because we've got further. We've got to the Industrial Revolution, so we got further. So we were able to create far more of these individualists. And it means that you get the collapse of religiousness, you get feminism. And what does feminism do? It creates an evolutionary mismatch for men and women. It creates a society dominated by women and women's values, which are things like harm avoidance and equality and empathy, to the suppression often of systematizing and intelligence and these male values, these group values. It suppresses masculinity. That becomes toxic masculinity. So men are told that there's something wrong with them if you're a man. Men are told that everyone's a winner. Competition is removed from schools. Nobody can compete anymore. It's been shown that you need competition to be high in testosterone, but this is all taken away. So we have an evolutionary mismatch for men. We have an evolutionary mismatch for women because they're pressured to be like men and so on. So you have feminism, you have multiculturalism, so that you put your energy and resources into people other than you and against your fitness interests and against your genetic interests. This, as we've seen, creates constant stress all the time. It's a severe evolutionary mismatch. It makes people depressed and on edge and anxious and decreases probably testosterone and things like that. You have this transsexuality, which surrounds people, I think, with a sort of disgust all the time and tells people that if you feel disgusted, there's something wrong with you and forces you to suppress how you feel. And so you have this runaway individualism in all of these ways, which creates this dysphoria, which creates this sense that all is not right, and which promotes ideas such as that anti-natalism, such as that you shouldn't have children, such as that you shouldn't look after your group. It promotes as morally right fitness-reducing ideas, because that's what you get with runaway individualism. You start off by saying we should help the poor over the rich within our own group. Then you get an arms race. We should help the other group over our own group. And then eventually we should help the other species over our own species. And as the arms race continues, we should just kill ourselves. We're all terrible. And this is allowed to happen because you have this evolutionary mismatch, which means there is nothing to stop it happening. You have this runaway individualism. You have this mutation within the society, which means that there's not enough people to stop it. And so what you eventually get is this runaway and this dysphoria. And so this dysphoria, which I was seeing the beginnings of when I was at Durham University 20 years ago, is the new crucible of evolution. Because the only people that are going to have children, the people that will absorb those ideas, those maladaptive fitness-reducing ideas, which say that it's bad to have children, it's bad to look after your group over other groups, it's bad to look after your family over other families, it's good to be an individual and not have children, it's good to be decadent, it's good to just be materialist. It's all these are all good. They induce depression in people. These ideas, if you absorb those, then you're probably not going to pass on your genes. So the only people that will pass on their genes, either directly or indirectly, will be those who don't absorb those. So they'd have to be resistant to them. Now, the only people that are going to be resistant to them are going to be the people that are inclined to have children for strongly genetic reasons, or inclined to look after their group, their kin, for strongly genetic reasons. And nothing can stop them. Even being brainwashed with the idea that what they're doing is wrong, even that can't stop them. And so who are those people? Well, the first seems to be people that are highly religious. and highly right-wing. Those people, that is what predicts fertility, being religious and being right-wing. Now, that makes sense because you could argue that religious people and right-wing people are, to some extent, a remnant normal population. They are the people that would have survived in pre-industrial times. They are group selected. Being right-wing and being religious correlates with physical health, correlates with mental health, correlates with markers of low mutation, correlates with even having a symmetrical face and being good-looking. They have low mutational load because they were the norm in pre-industrial times, and everything else is a deviation from them, and therefore is associated with individualism, and thus with mutational load, and thus with being genetically and physically sick. Those are the first people. The second people are simply people that are kind, people that are high in the trait agreeableness. They want to nurture, they want to have children, and they have children. The third is people that have low IQ. They have children by accident. They don't mean to. They're too impulsive to use contraception or too stupid to use it properly. They don't understand that the pill, that has to be taken at the same time every day. You can't just knock down those bad boys with a glass of red wine when you remember. And so they get pregnant. And then people with low conscientiousness, that is to say, people with low impulse control, similar kind of thing. And then finally, people with some narcissistic traits, in particular extreme selfishness, who have children as an extension of self, have children because it gets money for them from the state or whatever. So this implies that the middle is hollowing out. And it's the extremes that are breeding, which would predict the coming apart of large polities, which is what happens in the winter of civilization. Large polities come apart. Large Rome comes apart. And civilization, as IQ goes down, retreats into these Byzantiums which preserve it. And that is what I think might be happening today. But the key point to return to is that we have to think that no matter how much we might feel depressed by what is happening at the moment in the world, we have to realize that this is evolution, this is Darwinian evolution in action, and we are subject to it. And it used to be child mortality and war, but now it's something else. It's reimposed itself, Darwinian selection pressures, in the form of feminism, which basically destroys the self-esteem of men and destroys even monogamy, and that such that only the best men psychologically can cope and get through and breed. Multiculturalism does the same. It tries to make you basically mentally ill and despairing and unwilling to carry on and unwilling to fight, such that only those that are genetically inclined to do so will continue. So I see the same thing with the transsexual movement. It just confuses people and messes them up and makes them not understand things from a very young age, such that only those that are the genetically strongest will survive that onslaught of Darwinian pressure. And so that's how I see our situation now. We are subject to a new and very strong evolutionary selection pressure, and that is wokeness. And it is those that can continue to have children or to look after their kin or to look after their extended kin in those circumstances who pass on their genes in that context and thus win the battle of evolution over the next 100 years. Now, I'm sorry if that's not wrapping up. Now, I'm sorry if that's if that's not particularly cheery, but it at least helps to make sense, or I hope it makes sense of what seems to be happening to us. And it really hit home to me in the summer when Biden was elected, and or winter, autumn rather, and the Black Lives Matter riots, and now these riots about this Sarah Everard person. This is evolution in action. She's 33 years old. She's absorbed this ideology which says delay fertility, devote your 20s and even the first half of your 30s to your career, and then have children. She's absorbed that ideology, and she's absorbed the feminist ideology that says, oh, well, you have the right to walk around on your own at late at night in London and whatever. She's absorbed that ideology and thus has been killed. It is a Darwinian event. And there are many more such Darwinian events going on all the time, where people that absorb those ideologies consequently do not pass on their genes. And it's only those that don't absorb those ideologies, that don't act on them, that don't become depressed, that pass on their genes. And we know that being left-wing is negatively associated with fertility. And the more left-wing you are, the more negatively associated it is. Why? Because being left-wing is individualistic. It's to do with values of harm avoidance and equality. And people that are individualistic tend not to pass on their genes. It's the religious, the group-oriented that tend to pass on their genes. People that are left-wing, part of it seems to be suffering from depression. They're very high in guilt. They're very brainwashable. And so they feel negative feelings very strongly. And therefore they feel depressed, and therefore they don't want to have children. They don't pass on their genes. Depression is an expression of high mutational load. They have high mutational load. They have high mutational load of the mind. They absorb fitness-reducing ideas. They don't pass on their genes. And it is those, as I say, that can be resistant to this that will survive. People like us and people who carry on with the adaptive worldview, which is the worldview sanctified by the religion which Stead referred to at the beginning, where you put your group over in yourself and you put your group over other groups. And it's people that will, basically for genetic reasons, because the whole environment is there to brainwash us against this, still hold to that will be here 100 years from now. And so I hope that is some useful information.
Edward, what a virtuosic exposition, replete with facts, just as I expected it to be, and as depressingly stimulating, if one can sort of call it that. Just a bit before I open it to questions, is it possible, I suppose it's not, to quantify these two sort of divergent forces, the one you mentioned towards society splitting off into different groups because of the increased fertility of them, and those groups contracting which have a lower fertility. That force compared to the desire of the state to homogenize society. So one could see which is a likely outcome. I suppose that sort of thing is very difficult to do, I'm sure.
Well, you could, yeah. I'm working on a book at the moment with a colleague who he's the super intelligent computer person, and he's a young chap who was at the Traditional Britain Group thing actually, and he's modelling all this stuff. So I can't comment on that, but yes, it is, and it's being modelled, but I can't tell you the statistics off the top of my head at the moment.
Oh, okay. Oh, that sounds excellent. Very good. All right, I'm sure many people would have questions. Perhaps Peter, you've raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Stead.
Hello.
Okay, I've got a question. One sort of point is, you say left wing. I'd probably say maybe a liberal would be another way of expressing it, because left wing also includes a socialist, which are collective. So I think in some ways that's a tricky thing regarding what's left and what's liberal. But my a question is in respect to the various issues of wokeness that you're talking about. In some ways, I'd say that actually comes out of a Protestant Christianity with its universalism, individualism, and its general sort of what was it? Maybe abstract equality. How would you relate a Protestantism and a Puritanism to this, and does that relate back to the idea of having children, because they don't tend to not have children?
No, I think I didn't say that individualism is inherently maladaptive. It's that it's become maladaptive now because of runaway individualism. So if you look at Protestants in the 17th century, then they had more children than the Catholics. But you could argue that it was the Protestants that were the individualists. If you're in the middle of society, then the way you can play for status, and the way that they always do play for status, these middle class people, is by going on about equality and going on about harm avoidance, by virtue signaling. It's adaptive to do that. And and particularly under an ecology where the higher your social status is, the more likely you are to pass on your genes, which was the case until 1800, then it's adaptive to do that. You combine that with high fertility and you get to the top. So it's not inherently bad. It's once you get runaway individualism, which is what we've got now, that you move from that to say, which is perfectly, or even communism, which people would advocate natalism, to these maladaptive ideas of our group is evil and we shouldn't have children and whatever. So I don't think it's inherently bad. It's a product of wokeness. Wokeness, you're quite right, should be separated from like old-fashioned leftness, which would have been in the interests of a lot of the working class people that espoused it. And another thing, with regard to your religion comment, I think that's very true. Paul Gottfried has argued that multiculturalism is basically a Christian heresy. It's a Gnostic heresy. And what a lot of these Gnostic heresies did, and interesting, they were operating at a time when it was warmer, so the Roman warm period, compared to when they were crushed, which was when it got colder. You kind of had runaway individualism. I mean, you had them arguing that life is evil, God is evil, we're created by an evil satanic God, and they virtue signaled into saying, well, therefore we shouldn't have children. And I'm more Christian than you, for no one should have children because we're bringing them into the world of Satan. And that, you could argue, is a maladaptive idea, and that is why under level group selection people kind of crushed it. I mean, you had a group called the Fabianites that were based around the man would masturbate over a woman who was on her period, mix his semen with her menses, and then eat it as the body and blood of Christ. And he had to do that with 365 women to reach the top layer of heaven. And you couldn't have children. I mean, you had totally bonkers ideas, as bonkers as wokeness today in that period. So that was Gnostic heresy, and I would agree that multiculturalism is basically a Gnostic heresy.
Excellent. Before I move on, is that any other comments, Peter? Or
I suppose quickly is it wasn't inevitably Calvinism that caused woke. It did come out of woke. In some ways, it's linked to it as a heresy. But so in essence, if they had kids, if they had a lot more kids still, then they wouldn't be as crazy as they are, right? Is that what you're saying? So
no, I'm not saying, or it may be the case that if people have children, then it calms them down and makes them realize they should invest in their interests and changes their mind. But I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it is a modern phenomenon because of a lack of group selection and other factors as well, maybe higher mutational load, I don't know, which means that these ideas have switched to being highly maladaptive in a way they didn't used to be.
Yeah. Whereas in China, they had a one-child policy, but they don't seem to, apart from Maoism, they don't seem to be quite as crazy. That's my last comment.
No, because they've been subject to harsher conditions. I think that's the thing. They industrialized later.
Okay.
Well, thank you. I think it was Stuart whose hand I saw first raised. So and then it's Mikhail, then Lee, AJ, and Michael from London. I think that's you. So yeah, Stuart, please unmute and not nice to have you. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm good, thanks. Peter kind of overlapped a bit with what I was going to ask regarding fecundity, like how many children had her generation and what the kind of relative effect would be on whether that's dysgenic or eugenic. Now, I would assume that if you're putting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, and having one child in your mid to late 30s, you're really hoping that all of your best genes are expressed in that one child, versus if you had 3 or 4 children. So is that
why would all your best genes be expressed in that child? Why would that be the case if you have?
No, I mean, you're playing the lottery. There's a higher chance that they won't be. So does that sharpen the problem?
Yeah, if I mean, people would have lots of children in before 80. One of the reasons why the population comes up after the Industrial Revolution is because people have loads of kids, hoping that some survive to look after them in old age or whatever, and then they all survive. And so in the old days, a family would have 6 kids and end up with 3 kids or something, whereas now by the generation of, I don't know, my great-grandparents, the family would have 6 kids and end up with 6 kids. And so the population spikes, and there's a sort of a period before people kind of fully absorb the fact that the situation has changed and that you can have fewer children. But I don't know. Do I reckon, have we met?
Yeah, we've met at a conference before.
Yes, you seem familiar. I recognize whatever.
Good.
Stuart, is that okay? So I might move on to the next question. Is that, or do you want to get back?
Yeah, perhaps I would kind of tag on to that comment. It's a selection pressure is really, I suppose, kind of that's the proving ground for if you have lots of children. And I suppose in the modern context, having one child when you're old and more prone to mutation means that child is also insulated from Darwinian processes. So it's making it.
No, I don't. What you mean? You're investing more energy in them so that they're less likely to die young. If that's what you mean, yeah, that's K strategy versus R strategy. That's quite true. So as the environment becomes more harsh yet stable, then people reduce the number of children they have, but invest more in each of them, so that at least some of them can survive. That's true. But at the moment, the likelihood of a child dying is so remote that's really no longer relevant. So yeah, I mean you've got the difference between a crab that will have hundreds of children and just let nature do its course, and a human that'll have 1 or 2 per litter. But I don't think that's really relevant now, because they're all going to survive.
Oh, if you don't mind, I'll move on. I think Mikhail, you're next on the list, please.
I have a few remarks and comments, maybe. I really found fascinating one aspect, and I want to give a little bit of different perspective, because first I was startled when Edward was talking about the importance of collectivism, and then I realized why he was saying such things, and I realized that it is, and I will use Heideggerian philosophy, it is due to the fact that you as Anglo-Saxon people are in a different historical context than us. Whereas you haven't lived we are living in a post-communist country. And therefore, for us to reach equilibrium, we want to go more into the direction of individualism. Whereas for you want to go more into the direction of collectivism, right? So I found that very fascinating, that it's not universal, but it's relative in this sense, due to the historical context. And second, what I sort of was thinking about is, I watched this interesting YouTube video about Carl Schmitt. It is by, I think he has a PhD in philosophy, and he talks about the concept of the political from Carl Schmitt. And to put it very simply, he says that to be in the world of the political is to divide the world into friend and enemy. So, but I think I myself believe that's how this discussion was unfolding. So what Edward was trying to do is identify our enemy, right, in some sense. And I mean this in an instinctual level. And I ultimately think that this enemy is an enemy due to in the sense of the selfish gene, how Richard Dawkins puts it. So these are our enemies because they don't have the good genes, and we have the good genes, and we want to protect our good genes, right? At least that's how I understand it.
Yeah,
but...
we could conceive of it as a little bit like being in a zombie apocalypse. So you have the popularity at the moment. It's been popular for a long time of these zombie movies. The whole country gets taken over by these zombies that want to destroy, eat brains, and are just destructive of civilization and take us back to the Dark Ages. And there's a few people that manage to hold out and maintain civilization. And that's the situation we're in. And we're those people that aren't the zombies. And the vast majority of people either are literally are spreading the virus of multiculturalism, around the virus of wokeness, whatever, which creates more and more zombies. And there's some of us that have managed not to catch that virus, and therefore we are the ones whose genes will pass on. We will survive the apocalypse.
Yes,
that's how I think you could conceive.
I also want to make one more remark, because I was somewhat influenced by your video, which was about postmodernists have no souls. And it's fascinating because I think it's connected also with this different historical context of the Slavic people and the Germanic people, because I feel like that this is all fundamentally irrational, whereas you feel like this is all fundamentally rational.
I don't know about that. I was kind of being a bit tongue-in-cheek when I said they have no souls. Okay. Because I was saying that the soul was related to Aristotelian notions of truth and which they don't believe in, and things like that. But I do think that we can conceive of them as a sort of almost a sort of a zombie form that they mark themselves out with the blue hair and green hair and things like that, so you know what you're dealing with. And you need to stay away from them. But where are you based, by the way?
In Bratislava.
So Slovakia. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. You know, you can buy my book in Slovakian.
In Slovakian.
Yeah. I'll show you. Where is it now? Yeah. Translation of my book available in Slovakian. There you are.
That wasn't something I was I'd expected at all. I hadn't seen that, but is that all right, Mikhail? Shall we move on to the next question? No, we can always come back.
Now,
yeah. I know you're very fertile as to questions. Lee, I think you're next, please. Nice to have you here. You could unmute and ask Edward the question.
Hey, you all right?
Yeah, good.
Hello.
Hello. So my question was basically, so you're saying these maladaptive people aren't going to breed and they're not going to pass on their genes, but the like residual normative population still is going to survive this, basically. What do you think the chances of European peoples winning the battle of group selection with these other groups that have been imported? You know, how long will it take until it flips and then we're all back to this normative population? And then what do you think our chances of winning the battle of group selection with these other groups in Europe at the moment is?
I think that what's going to happen is a retreat. So you're going to get vast areas. First of all, among the whites, you're getting declining intelligence. That's the first thing. So that creates third world conditions, even if there's no immigration. I mean, it's predicted that England will have an IQ of about 85 by the end of the century, which is the same as like a poor Latin American country, or as I don't know, a Middle Eastern country, something like that. So and so it's going to be chaos, and civilization will go backwards, and it won't be good. Now, what will happen is that in those circumstances is that intelligence predicts migration. So intelligent people will get out, and will go to these refuges of civilization. And what it looks like from the data that we're analyzing at the moment is that above a certain IQ, the thing that predicts breeding is religiousness and conservatism. So those two things seem to be gradually coming together. So what you would predict is that you're going to get intelligent, religious, conservative people that are going to get out. And as is happening, like people like that are leaving California and going to Texas. This is happening.
Yeah.
And it's gentrifying, and it's going to happen more. And what will be left behind is poor whites and ethnic minorities. And what I would expect is that the high intelligent ethnic minorities will make their way to the conservative intelligent areas and just be absorbed into those populations. And the whites, just very low IQ, will just mix with the ethnic minorities. And as happened during the collapse of Roman civilization, you had these refugias of civilization, of Europeness that remained. And then you had these other places like what is now Turkey, that used to be white. What is now North Africa, that used to be white, that just mixed with the ethnic minority populations to create new genetic clines. So I think there'll be a retreat of intelligence, a retreat of conservatives for intelligent people and of white people into these Byzantium-like refuges, where they will become more. There will be then a arms race like there was in Victorian England to be more right wing, and from there civilization may come about again. It may go backwards a bit. I think I can conceive of that we'll stop flying. We've already stopped Concorde. We'll be too stupid to fly. There'll be too many mistakes. We'll go backwards a bit. And then I don't know how far backwards. I mean, the real black-pilled idea is the idea of my colleague Bruce Charlton, which is that we'll just carry on outsourcing things to robots and whatever, until we're really stupid, like IQ of 70. And then we'll collapse, not back into farming, but back into hunter-gathering. And there'll be an ice age of not 1,000 years, but 10,000 years. And that's the real... And then what's going to be left? Radical. The pyramids. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Excellent, very stimulating. I think AJ, sorry, Lee, is that okay? Do you have any point? Thank you. Good question. AJ, please, if you could kindly unmute. Thank you.
Okay. A few comments, mostly brief ones. First of all, since Ed was nervous, I once again agree with everything you said. Okay. So don't worry about that. And in fact, I'm planning, I don't know, I have a talk coming up. I want to make sure Ed is invited. What date is that?
It's 7th of April, I think, is 7th of April at sort of 8:15.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Ed, please come and hear AJ.
And I'm giving a talk, and I gave a general title of multi-level selection, which follows up on what you said. But you inspired me to specifically present some data, right, that supports what you've been saying and actually goes a little bit beyond it. I think I sent you the materials for what I called, with your permission, Dutton's rule, the molecular genetic evidence, right? And why men are probably more group selected than women. So I'm going to talk about sex differences in multi-level selection, among other things, as a result of hearing you speak, because you covered some of the material I had in mind. So I'm just going to build on it rather than start from scratch. All right, so that's my second comment. And you're probably going to want to see that. So I think you should be invited with Stead's permission. Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The other thing I want to elaborate on is this whole idea of virtue signaling, because it turns out that Charles Darwin brought this up in The Descent of Man a very long time ago, okay? And he didn't call it virtue signaling. He called it that people in The Descent of Man, you see, he was talking about what drove the evolution of humans and human groups. And he didn't have the word group selection. That was coined later. And he also, let me put my hand down so it won't be cluttering things up, okay? He also didn't have the word virtue signaling. But what he referred to, and I remember the quote, that one of the reasons one of the things that drove social evolution and the evolution of pro-social values was what he called a desire to win the approval of one's fellows. That's the way he said it. And he thought that was a key drive that humans have to gain the approval of one's fellows. So that essentially, according to Darwin, virtue signaling is as old as evolution itself, at least in our species, right? And this wokeness or whatever, these are some new values that in order to win the approval of one's fellows, you have to parrot and endorse and very publicly display the values that are socially dominant. And in the past, like pre-1800, as Ed points out, when the pressures for group selection were higher, the group selected values were dominant. And as a result, virtue signaling took a different form. It took the form of courage and heroism and valor and patriotism. That's what you wanted to display, because that got the approval of one's fellows and also impressed a lot of women. That was important, right? Still is, by the way, you know, if you want to reproduce anyway. But then with this change to individualistic values that started increasing post-1800, okay, and I will add that was probably, in my view, due to the end of the Little Ice Age, which imposed these harsh conditions. It came from outside. It wasn't self-generated. The Little Ice Age imposed these really harsh conditions during the early modern era. Once we switched to the late modern era, warmer climates, abundance of food, reduction in group competition, because group competition was always about resources, right? The resources didn't need to be competed over as much. Then you have this rise of the individualistic values, and the virtue signaling always parrots, right? Whatever the dominant social values are. And now that the individualism is the dominant social values, the same ancient mechanism that Darwin used to call the approval of one's fellows, and is now by some called virtue signaling, it's exactly the same mechanism, now starts parroting those values. And it always parrots whatever are the dominant social values. For example, in Puritan New England, whoever was the most Puritan won the game, right? Among the Vikings, whoever, you know, was most bold and fearless in battle, you know, he was the guy at the top of the heap, right? It's whatever are the dominant social values. And once those change, this exact same mechanism is what I'm saying, just amplifies that signal, so to speak. All right. So everything I'm saying is completely in support of what Ed is saying here, but emphasizing it a little more. This is an ancient mechanism. This is not a new thing. This is old. But now it's amplifying a different signal than it was before, right? Because of the shift in values towards the individualistic values, right?
I think it's fascinating that what you said about the Little Ice Age.
Mm-hmm.
So what one would predict is if you go back to the warm periods, then you would perhaps have more of an individualistic slant on things.
Yes.
And I think you see that should be tested. You see that with the early church, Gnosticism, and the medieval period is much more individualistic. And then as you move to the Little Ice Age, the nature of the church, for example, becomes much more group oriented. Everyone has to believe the same thing. And in these individual, like the killing of witches, and for example, these are like individual type people. So that's very interesting. I think that should be tested. It would be interesting.
I haven't gone as far back as some of the things you're saying, but for the last few centuries, I've actually correlated all of this to climate change. And it is extraordinarily highly correlated to climate. Right. And yeah, I can show you that sometime. It's a little technical for this audience, but you know, we can talk. I'm always here. I'm locked up.
Yeah, you should come on. You should come down the Jolly Heretic one Thursday, Adrian.
Okay. Well, in either case, I'm just endorsing what you're saying, but then I have more facts to add. And I sent you a little workup that I did a while back, and I actually published it on the molecular genetic evidence for Dutton's rule, because what you're saying, what I'm emphasizing to the group, I know you know this because I sent you the data. This is not just speculation, right? This has solid scientific evidence behind it, right? And I can try to present as much of that. So I'm going to make my presentation less about me and more on an expansion of what Ed just said, because I think it's superb. And I think the group is responding to it. So since I wrote that whole book, you know, I'll have to send you my book on multi-level selection. You're going to love it. It just came out last October, probably for your birthday. You know, I'll email it to you. But in either case, I was going to present that I was kind of in a quandary because it was so much material. How am I going to get a message that can be packed into 1 hour? But you just opened that up for me because I can expand on your statements and present, you know me, I am one of those math guys. So I will present quantitative data out the wazoo because that's what I do. So fear not, unless the group disagrees instead.
No, AJ, that sounds wonderful that we could have some continuity. And some of the things that Ed has touched on, you can expand upon them and adduce figures to support them. That sounds wonderful. Do you have any further points, or should I go on to the next question, AJ, as we have a few?
What I could offer is to do this, since I'm going to send it to Ed, and you have the whole mailing list. Now, don't tell the publisher this because I'm not supposed to be giving it away. But instead, if I emailed you the book, could you make it generally available to the group?
It's very kind of you. That's very kind of you. Absolutely. If
I'm
anyone
not supposed to do that. The publisher wants money. But I'll do it for a small group, and that's not going to hurt their sales. It's only going to put a dent. It's selling like hotcakes anyway, so we have nothing to worry about. So they have nothing to worry. I don't make any money off of this anyway, I do it for science. So I will send it to you with your permission, and you can distribute it as you see fit to the whole mailing list, including Ed. And that way he can decide whether he wants to show up for my talk or not, because he may hate it, and he may want nothing to do with this. It's utter rubbish, Okay,
excellent. So that sounds great. That sounds very good. Now, I think if we can, I think Michael from London, I think you're next on the list. Yeah, please.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
You were set up. Edward, I enjoyed the talk very much. It was very interesting. I have, 2 or 3 comments and then 2 questions. First of all, I would describe myself as left-wing. In how you itemized it, I basically found at least half, if not more, didn't conform to me. I have children and so forth. Also, it seemed to me since much of paganism is polytheistic or pluralistic, multiculturalism, it seems to be something that's quite in conformity with paganism as a whole. So in a sense, what you were saying is we're doomed. We're not going to pass our genes on. What it has to do with community and individualism. But I don't know if even this group here, how much of a community we could call ourselves. We're an association, but we all live in different places. We don't see each other physically and so forth. So I know we could still be a community, but I'm not sure, especially having the left-wing sentiments I have, that I'm part of a community. These are just various comments I wanted to make. I also think it's important to point out that it's often overlooked that wokefulness is also as much a part of right wing as it seems to be left wing. So that's just an interesting thing. I've read a lot of stuff on that. But all right, I found it curious when you were talking about demonstrations. You mentioned Black Lives Matter. You mentioned the Carbon Common ones, and I think there was a third one. But what was curious to me was how you completely ignored the elephant in the room then, which would be the Capitol riots in Washington, D.C. So that's one query. And then the other one, and I'm sure there's a straight answer to it all. You talk about the individualism, whatever we are, not passing on genes, and so you have this whole other right-wing religious culture expanding or surviving. Given that, why is our world population constantly expanding? And not even expanding, doubling in less and less time all along. So that seems to be a little incongruent. And because why we're having no children or one child or so forth is precisely the population explosion.
Okay, I don't. First, to answer the second question first, I think that the world population is expanding because poorer third world nations are going through industrialization, and they're going through the great transition, and so therefore they're going through a phase of, in Africa particularly, of having lots of children because they're industrializing. They're going, just like we did, and just like you see in like Mouse Utopia or something, John Calhoun. You take away normal evolutionary conditions, you get this population explosion in the first instance. So that's what's pushing world population up. I don't think I don't think people are not having children out of concern for world population, because we can look at what not having children. We can look at what not having children.
I'm not hearing that.
Well, someone's talking in the background. We can look at what not having children correlates with, and not having in Western countries, and it has certain relationships. You know, not having children is predicted by a certain kind of personality. It's predicted by, for example, people that are in Western countries that are more sort of what we call R strategists, so more interested in just having lots of sex. They don't want to invest energy in having children. They don't have children. So I don't think it's to do with some desire to keep the population down. As for the Capitol riots, no, I didn't mention that. I suppose I could have done. What you would expect under harsh Darwinian conditions is that the religiousness has it takes these different components which are adaptive, such as over-detecting agency, which means that if you hear a noise in the forest and you think it's a wolf and it's really the wind, then you've lost nothing. But if you think it's the wind and it's a wolf, you've lost everything. So it's best to over-detect agency. So that's selected for a desire to solve problems, a desire to find causation, all of these various cognitive biases that we have. Desire to follow the leader, in-group loyalty, pro-social behavior, whatever. It takes all of these things that are selected for, and when things are selected for, they tend to kind of bundle together. And so religiousness has bundled together all of these adaptive things into one thing, which itself then becomes selected for and is up to 0.7 heritable in the case of fundamentalist religiosity or having religious experiences. So with the selection pressures weakening, one would expect the religious bundle to break up. And I think you see that in societies which are more, which are less developed than ours. They don't have the same conception of gods, of moral gods. It's been argued that the notion of the moral God develops particularly once we have farming, once we have then cities or towns, and we have communities where you have strangers. And if you all believe in the moral God that wants you to be moral, then you cooperate with each other, even if you don't know each other. And therefore this promotes positive and negative ethnocentrism and thus group selection. In these more simplistic societies, you don't really have moral gods. You just worship the ancestors and do the things the ancestors do. And so what one might expect these under the weakened selection, and this is with reference to multiculturalism as well, these different components of religiousness to come apart. And so you would get people that held to some components of religiousness, but not others. And I think you have that with multiculturalism, because they don't believe in God, they don't believe in moral gods, but they do have some components of religiousness. And you could argue that you have that with these QAnon people, with conspiracy theorists, you have some components of religiousness, but not all. Now, the thing that we're selected for is the collective worship of a moral God. That's what was produced under harsh Darwinian conditions. So I'd expect that to be associated with mental and physical health. And I produced a paper some time ago called "The Mutant Says in His Heart There Is No God," which presented evidence that that's indeed the case. So I'd expect these people that are involved in conspiracy theories or whatever to be to have mental problems and things. And consistent with that, there's some evidence that schizophrenia and being on the schizotypal scale, schizoid personality, schizotypal personality, is one of the things that predicts believing in conspiracy theories. So yeah, I think you're right that could be a manifestation of mutation and of runaway individualism, perhaps even.
I find some of your arguments could be really questioned and debated, but that's of course for another time.
Wow.
But I think looking at whatever we call the left orientation, there does seem to be a really concerted, open effort to not have many children. That's not true from my generation, and I suppose the one or two behind it, but I'm noticing for younger ones, they're not talking in terms of children particularly. So, I mean, I think I think that is a factor. And of course, the economy and the difficulties and all that become other factors. But I don't think you can really discard that as easily as you did.
What did I discard?
The fact that people are not having children because of the world population. It's a conscious decision.
Why would that make them not have children?
Because they don't want to contribute to the global expanding world population.
Why do we think they don't want to do that?
Because they say so. I'm saying that it's a commonly said thing. Now, maybe you haven't come upon it in your own researches, but I see it frequently. So,
well, if they were taking that view, then I would suggest that is a sort of a individualistic value, harm avoidance.
It may be easily.
Signal my goodness by not having children, kind of way to think, and that would
could also be a fear basis. I mean, there is a fear factor in there, not just a moral goody-goody. But also, let me just come back on the other thing, which I just remembered. You talk about multiple gods as not being moral. And I find that offensive as a statement, because I'm a pluralist, a polytheist, and also I would say I know many atheists who are just as moral, if not more ethical than a lot of other people who have other value systems. So
the fact that you find something offensive is completely irrelevant to me, and I don't care.
Sure.
And I don't know why you'd even say that. What's the point? And as for the morality thing, there is data on this, that people that are primed with gods and things like that end up being more pro-social, and people that believe they're being watched are more pro-social. And there is quite a lot of theorization that that's one of the reasons why moral gods manifested as a means to make people more pro-social. And that's all I was citing. You could perfectly reasonably get people that are atheists that have a strong moral sense. For example, one would expect atheism to be correlated with being very high in individualistic values, and therefore thinking that it was very important to be kind to people and to promote equality, and that would be a moral sense. But the evidence is that at the moment that in Western samples, in fact, that being religious weakly correlates with being high in agreeableness and high in conscientiousness and low in mental instability, and these are traits that are associated with pro-social behavior.
Sure, I agree, but I would say that's basically traditionally how they're understood, not necessarily how it actually is. But
that's when you get large samples and you subject them to these instruments, and those.
No, I won't deny that either. No, I mean,
I agree with you. It's not. And as for your generation being left wing and having more children, that would be consistent with the fact that the people that were a bit older were not.
Yeah, that's what I said. I'm talking about younger generations now.
Right, we're not subject to runaway individualism, but that has now come in.
All right. And so what do? We just lean back and let it all happen?
I don't know.
Produce children?
I think on that more general, perhaps we'll move on. Michael, thanks for your questions. I would just say that of the polytheistic religions in the world, Hinduism is expanding, but that's a more complex phenomenon, which perhaps it's not the place to talk about this. But there's quite a few people I'd like to get to. I think the next person I saw was Andre. Andre, hello. Perhaps you could unmute and ask Ed your question. Andre, are you there, or have you wandered off? Maybe. If you don't get back. Oh, hello, Andre.
Go ahead. I see it.
Hello.
So I've been very interested by what I've heard. I'm Flemish. I live in Antwerp. due to social pressure, I've been educated in French, and in contact with the French culture, I met the French Nouvelle Droite, the New Right, and later on, I became a Northern European separatist. I resigned from the Catholic Church, and I'm back to my roots. And I have no question, but I have a hint. If you see my image, I show there 2 books. The one of the left is not complete, is How Can You Be a Pagan? And what's interesting, it has been written 35 years ago by the French leader of the Nouvelle Droite in Paris. And my hint is that the fact, the image on the right is an English translation that you can purchase on Amazon for $5. So that was it.
Oh,
Right.
okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Andre. I mean, we've tried to set up a meeting with Moot with Alan de Benoit, but he's not keen on Zoom, and maybe we'll have to wait until we have Moot again in London and can put him up somewhere. I think. Sorry.
I joined the GRES, Groupe de Recherche et d'Études sur la Civilisation Européenne, about 40 years ago. And he is still very active.
Yes.
And they have a very good magazine each 3 months named Elements. In French,
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Thanks for that.
So it's a serious reference. If it is said by Alain de Benoit, it's a good reference.
Yeah, I tried to get Alan de Benoit on my own show, but he's very technophobic. And he doesn't seem to have a computer with a camera in even.
Probably, yes.
So,
oh, you try. Oh, well, that's interesting. All right, thanks, Andre. And I think the next person is Louise. Perhaps you could. Hello, Louise.
Hi, it's actually Anne Harrod.
Oh, hello, Anne Howard. Hello, nice to meet. Nice to have you on board.
In ages. But yeah, I just wanted to ask you about your comments on Sarah Everard, to be honest, because yeah, I just want to understand what you were trying to say about that.
Yeah. What about it?
Well, you said it was Darwinism selection playing out, but I mean, she was murdered because she was walking.
Yes, at night, in the dark, in a dangerous part of London.
But
I wouldn't walk on my own at 9 o'clock at night in Brixton. I wouldn't do it. And I know many other people that would they think the same way. They wouldn't do it. And so I'm saying that to be that reckless to do that would be consistent with having absorbed certain.
Yes, but you linked it to her choosing not to have children. And
no, I didn't. Well, no, I linked it in the sense that she's 33 years old and doesn't have children.
So potentially she has taken the opportunity to have a career.
Exactly.
Which have because of.
Yes, that's exactly what she's done.
So you're blaming.
No, not blaming. No, I'm observing what seems to have happened, and I'm theorizing as to why it might have happened.
So you believe women would be safer in a stronger patriarchal society?
I don't know about stronger patriarchal society, but I think, well, yeah, you could argue that because, I mean, I remember 25, whatever it was, when I was about 17, how long ago that was. And it was about 9 o'clock at night in quite a leafy, nice part of London. And we'd come back from the theatre where we'd watched Oliver. And it was we had a joint sixth form, and it was all these girls from the girl bit of the sixth form, and me and a couple of other boys, and we boys we were going to walk home. None of the girls were going to do that, and one of them said, "Oh yeah, I'll walk home," and this other girl said, "What, do you want to get raped?" And that was in 1997 in quite a safe part of like London. So I'm suggesting that it seems to me that Sarah Everard, by virtue of being childless at 33, and walking around late at night in the dark in a dangerous part of London, it seems to me to be consistent with, and it's not her fault, but it's been of absorbing certain elements of this sort of feminist ideology, you know, career, of course, delay fertility, only have one or no children. Well, of course, women should be allowed to walk around at night. Why shouldn't they? And that, as a result, seemingly, of that she lost her life.
Okay.
I'm not blaming her. I'm just saying it's not her. I mean, she has been brought up in an evolutionary mismatch. That's how I see it. So have I. So have you. And it makes us do things we shouldn't do.
I mean, Edward is an evolutionary theorist. Therefore, you know, his view on this event is different. You know, he's looking at it in a different context. I think. I hope that helps, Anne Howard. And thanks so much for asking the question. I think the next person is Father Frank. Hello, good to have you again.
Hi.
Back from your absolute storming success as Ossian in the in our literary performance the other week.
Listening to Edward reminded me of a line in Nietzsche's autobiography, Ecce Homo, where he says, "I'm not a man. I'm not a human being. I'm dynamite." I'm dynamite. So I feel, in a way, Ed, you are dynamite.
Oh, Tom.
I mean, that mean you. I mean some of your ideas, because you have broken all the taboos. You have smashed down all the idols. And indeed, there is one of Nietzsche's book entitled Twilight of the Idols, a subtitle, How to Philosophize with a Hammer. I shall definitely want to read your book. I will do that. I'm not committing myself to whether I agree with you, but observing the... I like your iconoclasm. Maybe you want to describe it a different way. But I have a simple question here. Question is, you base your argument on a Darwinist framework. Now, I am aware of certain civilizations which are often called traditional civilization. I mean, Stead a moment ago mentioned Hinduism, where you do society going through a phase of decline, or degeneration, or decadence, similar to the ones you have highlighted on the basis of a Darwinist argument. But in those civilizations, the concept is that it's cyclical. It goes around. Civilization is born, then goes through various phases, then declines, then it dies, but then it starts again on a cosmic scale. Now, your Darwinist argument, is it based on a linear concept or human development, or is there an element of, could be an element of cyclical element?
I would see the rise and fall of civilizations in cyclical terms. There's a very good book on this by Sir John Glubb, Pasha Glubb. I can't never remember the name of the book, but if you Google Sir John Glubb Civilization, you'll find the book. And he knows.
He was actually, sorry to interrupt, I think he was in charge of the Arab Legion.
Yeah, he was Pasha Glubb.
Yes.
Pasha Glubb, that's right.
Yes.
And he notes that the civilization. Well, he's not the only one to note this, but he notes it in a lot of detail that they all go through the same phases. It's always the same. The civilization starts off high in what Ibn Khaldun called Asabiyah, in this sense of sort of groupishness and whatever, under very, very harsh conditions, and it's
right.
and eventually it builds cities, and then the Asabiyah goes down and the society becomes decadent, and then that's your winter stage. At the winter stage, everything is questioned, religion is questioned, aristocracy is questioned, all of the things that have held the society together are all subject to question, possibly because people are less stressed and they're less subject to they're less subject to stress, so they can think, that the people at the top can think straight, and they start questioning things, possibly because there's less group selection, so people become more individualistic, so they start there's less pressure, so they start questioning things, possibly because of whatever the reason, and there's many theories, and then the society collapses and you get multiculturalism, you get feminism at this stage, you get because of the collapse of patriarchy and religion and all this, and then you get a situation where intelligence is negatively associated with having children. And I looked at this in my book At Our Wits' End, and we showed indirect evidence that that was probably what was happening with Greece and Rome, that the intelligence was going down. And then it collapses back to a dark age until there's harsh selection pressure that AJ mentioned earlier, cold and whatever. So yeah, I would see it in cyclical terms, and I think it's incredible hubris to think that we're not going through that cycle. Why wouldn't we be? I know people that will think, oh well, we won't collapse because we're so technologically advanced and we're so brilliant. And I don't understand how they can think that. I think that we are collapsing.
Yes, I mean, sorry, only a brief comment. I think it's basically based on this idea of progress generated by the Enlightenment, the movement called the Enlightenment, both in England, above all in France, which has engendered this sort of pestilent ideology that we are actually progressing, as opposed to not evolution, but involution in a way, if you like, to quote some traditionalists also. But anyway, I mean, this is...
Alan de Benoit argues that it's Christianity and even Judaism that has this linear idea. He looks at that in On Being a Pagan. So it might be that the Enlightenment is just working out of something even older, of this linear way of thinking towards a utopia.
Although Spengler did Twilight of the West, does analyze various civilizations again according to this model. But anyway, yeah. I think it's enough from me.
All right, thanks very much. Louise has got a hand up. Is that, were you having? Is that Louise in Holland?
This is Louise in Holland.
Yeah, please. Go ahead, Louise.
I've just written down a couple of things. I did very much enjoy Mr. Sutton's thoughts and ideas and everything. I just wrote down a few things, and that was about the virtue signaling, which I find extremely irritating nowadays. It's, I've got friends who are like in Greenpeace, the vegans, you can put 10 fingers of what they're all members of, all these sorts of things, and they like to show off about it. So, but these sort of people, to me, they always seem like the people who aren't very confident, and they seem like they have to do virtue signaling to push themselves up in a way. I don't know, but that's just my idea. I've also written down that I think this is a result of what Mr. Sutton is saying, but I've noticed nowadays that people everywhere just make mistakes all the time. This seems to be like society is crumbling, like Mr. Sutton says. It just seems to be like mistake after mistake after mistake, and then everybody's corrupt and everything. And that was it. I just also written down about conspiracy theorists, because my idea about a conspiracy theorist was that was a term made up by government to hide themselves from people finding out the naughty things that they're up to, shall we say that? And I sort of think conspiracy theorist is a term made up by the government. That's just my idea.
Oh, thanks for that, Louis. Yeah. Do you have any comments, Edward?
Yeah, with regard to what Louis said about people who virtue signal pushing themselves up, there is some evidence for that. There was a paper published recently which found that virtue signaling is associated with like borderline personality disorder and narcissism.
Oh, my friend Rita will be very pleased to hear that anyway.
and that is a function of a sort of fundamental fear of abandonment and lack of self, and so you deal with it by creating a very strong identity.
That's exactly what I thought. Thank
being
you.
obsessed by wanting people to love you and value you, and therefore you virtually, as AJ said, you care a great deal about the approval of your fellows. Or sorry, as Darwin said. Secondly, with regard also that there's evidence that people that are high in depressive traits tend to be more prone to these kinds of behaviors, and so again it's a way of curing something in themselves, and there's evidence that it becomes addictive, and if you do it, it makes you feel better. It makes you feel better to virtue signal and be self-righteous, and so it's a kind of a cure. As for people being stupider and corruption, well, that would be what we would expect in a society of declining IQ. People started noticing, everyone that lives in Zimbabwe remembers the first time they were asked for a bribe. And it was, a few years after the Smith regime fell.
But it just amazes me, because it's like people, just like lawyers, you can't trust, I mean, you never probably could trust lawyers, but just lawyers, they everybody, they just make mistakes, and they don't seem to be very sorry about it afterwards. They seem to think that they're right, whatever happens.
People that have they would think they were right. Yeah, but it's just the paper by Raymond Cattell was written in the 30s, and it looked at his predictions on what a society would be like in declining IQ, and it's unbelievably prescient. Like reading.
Oh, really?
Like
really?
I'd love you to be able to tell me how I can deal with it, because it's driving me around the bend. What do I do?
You've fled to Holland, which I mean.
No, it's just it's the same everywhere. You can't hide from them. But I just can't mentally cope with it. I mean, I've had so many things that just happen all the time. I think I seem to attract it as well, apart from anything else. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But I just can't deal with it any longer. It just drives me around the bend.
We'll just give him a slap, I think.
All right, let's.
Sorry, I was just going to ask for conspiracy theories. What I used that term to mean was, of course, there are conspiracies. Conspiracies happen. And normally it's used to refer to really outlandish, unlikely conspiracies for which there's very little evidence. That's how it seems to be used in social science.
That's the thing about conspiracy theories, because it's always a very broad term, like it could be something that's very natural and a normal thing, or it could be something really stupid. It's sort of like a very broad sort of a thing. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, yes, fair enough, true.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thanks so much, Louise.
Thank you.
Ideally, I'd like some people, before we go back to people with repeat questions, ideally people perhaps who haven't said anything. Andrew, you were first on the call. Do you have, I mean, you're scientifically well read. Do you have any points to raise?
Managed to unmute myself. Gosh. Well, first I'd like to congratulate Ed for such a splendid talk, and I'm one of your latest, probably rising fans. I discovered you a few days ago when Stead sent the email round, and since then I've watched a few of your videos, including the zombie apocalypse one, and you come across to me a bit like a kind of Patrick Moore person. You're throwing ideas forward at such speed and with such enthusiasm. I'm having difficulty keeping up a lot of the time. And I feel to get the most out of your videos, I've got to watch them 2 or 3 times probably, but that will come later. I like your approach. The only thing I would say is perhaps, I mean, you're brave in the way that you jump onto things and you just go with the facts. I don't have any questions in particular about this particular video. No.
Oh well, kind words are always oil the wheels of any event. So thanks very much. I think Stuart, I don't know whether that your hand is up because you're not taking it down from the first one. Is that?
I did have another question.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
It was one about time preference. Does low time preference typically correlate with higher IQ? Are there any examples of societies where a high time preference is accompanied by a low IQ? And would you say that the prevalence of instant gratification in our culture is selecting for people that have a higher time preference?
I suppose you could argue that a lot of the average person in 1800 was significant in Britain, let's say, was significantly more intelligent than the average person now. But I wonder if that average, I mean, AJ might have a view on this. I wonder if that person would have had a higher time preference because mortality salience was higher, and so there are other, and they would die younger, and so there were other factors apart from intelligence which are going to impact time preference. And although intelligence does correlate with it, and so I wonder, so presumably it is possible to have a society that is more intelligent than another society but has a higher time preference. I wonder. There was a book that was published on time preferences by that chap that he does a YouTube channel called All Well and Good.
Yeah, I had put that on my to-read list.
And would you like me to respond to that?
Yeah, what do you think about that, AJ?
Just very simply, I don't think time preference is that highly correlated with IQ. It is more correlated with life history speed.
Yeah, that's what I thought you'd say.
And there has been a trend towards increasingly slow life history speeds over the last couple of centuries. It seems to be selected for at the present time. So we're developing different time preferences. Even though the intelligence is declining, we have more long-term time preferences right now on average than we did previously.
Yeah, so, that's what I was thinking.
To say any more would be excessively technical, but since you invoked me, I wanted to answer that. I really don't see any correlation to IQ per se.
No. So,
yeah. Could I just, perhaps people may not be familiar with the term time preference. Could AJ or you, Ed, just very briefly describe what that?
Basically, how the cliched example is you give a child a chocolate bar and you say you either eat that chocolate bar now or you wait 10 minutes and we'll get a second chocolate bar. So if you have high time preference, you want it now. You live for the now. And if you have low time preference, then you live for the future and you'll wait for the second chocolate bar. And that's basically time preference.
Excellent. Yeah, really useful concept. Thanks very much. Peter, and then Mikhail.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I've got a question. So it's more or less it's a scenario. So in essence, if you say that wokeness and globalization are effectively American imperialism, so in essence, it's a way of breaking down boundaries everywhere and effectively inserting American power into our lives in every form, and also to be able to effectively sort of get sort of free trade, and also in terms of multiculturalism, it's more or less a brain drain and cheap labour, etc., from all around the world. So in essence, it's a liberal system. How does that actually relate back to your sort of theory and framework in respect to religion, or does it? Or
what do you mean?
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Do you mean liberalism? Do you mean how does that grow?
Liberalism, or the liberal system under which we live, which is pushing a lot of these agendas. So it's very much a top-down stuff. I think there's very much top-down.
I think that so.
Evolution.
So I think that with what they've done is they've taken the individualistic type values and they have fetishized those into a sort of ersatz religion, which they cobbled together unconsciously of various things, you know, Martin Luther King and BLM and whatever. So it has, the religiousness bundle has kind of broken up, and it's taken aspects of it, in some ways the worst aspects of it, and that's what is, it has a kind of priesthood in the form of media and, you know, Ash Sarkar and people like that, and it has its followers, and it has its new church ladies, as Jim Goad calls them, in terms of the screaming woke mob, and it has its heretics, such as J.K. Rowling, who doesn't believe in transsexuals being same as women, and it has its total dissenters. And it seems to me to be a kind of religion.
And so they sort of want to attack conservatives who don't like these movements, and they want to reduce populations. They want to reduce people having children. They want to effectively import people rather than sort of nurture people, really, because it's cheaper and it's easier to have this plastic sort of system. So in terms of that, so there's this political and religious approach which you can take, and then you have another approach which is a Darwinian, and it's more natural. So in some ways you could actually interpret things one way or the other. You could say, well, it's politics, or you could say in some ways that it's these bottom-up pressures of dysgenic pressures and various interests. Does it all tie in, do you think? Does it, these two dimensions, how are they related? Are they incidental, or are they in some way used as a synthesis of this thing? If that makes any sense. I'm not sure it's making much sense now, but you see what I mean on this? So you have the religious, political side of things, and also you have the side that you're referring to in respect to low birth rate and all this.
Well, I think the two are intermixed. So what you had under Darwinian conditions was a religion which took that which was adaptive and made it into the will of God. Adaptive at the group level and made it into the will of God, and at the individual level to some extent and made it into the will of God. And what you have now with runaway individualism is a religious form that takes something which is maladaptive and makes it into the will of, not of God exactly, but of some sort of higher will or something that has aspects of religiosity, and makes it sort of very, very strongly socially sanctioned in a kind of semi-religious way. So it pushes destruction, group level destruction, individual level destruction, fitness destruction, as the will of a sort of ersatz God. And I think that's what's going on.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much for that, Chris. I think we're Ed's been very kind with his energy and his time. So we're perhaps no more questions. Let's just try and deal with those with the people have asked, wish to ask. I want to give preference to those who've not asked a question before, and Michael has messaged me and very much wants to speak. So Michael from Germany, please unmute and speak. Oh dear. No, he's trying to. He is familiar with the technology. Keep trying, and I'll ask.
In the corner of your rectangle.
Oh yeah, he's very au fait. Okay. Well, I'll pass on to Lexi. Are you there? Do you want to ask a question? Hello.
Got it. Hey.
Oh, sorry, he just come back. Lexi, you're next. You're next.
Technology doesn't like me. It's well known. I understand the basics, but amazing things happen. But I'll be quick about it anyway. Thank you very, very much, Edward Dutton, for a very stimulating talk. But there are one or two things, and I really did want to say something about them. First of all, I absolutely think it's important that people talk about intelligence, which you do and people like you, because is it not the case that in society people don't want to talk about it? Intelligence is not mentioned anymore. And it's a key to so much that happens in society. So I think that's an absolutely important thing. However, I'm not entirely comfortable with the idea that intelligence, which seemed to be a little bit implied in what you were saying, is always a desirable thing as opposed to not intelligence. I remember a long time ago, I wrote a letter to a publication called American Renaissance, in which I said that I didn't think a lack of intelligence was necessarily a bad thing. And it was quite extraordinary. The letters that came in were almost abusive, actually, all very negative. No one supported me. That was one point. The second point is you talked repeatedly, I think you used the expression 6-7 times, runaway individualism. But I don't see society that we are living in today as being dominated by runaway individualism. And you said yourself, there's a zombie apocalypse. Well, there's one thing that a zombie isn't, it's individualistic. So if we're having a zombie apocalypse, we're certainly not having runaway individualism as well. There seems to be a contradiction there. I think that the people here are much more likely to be runaway individualists, and maybe that's part of our problem. If we took a straw poll, I won't do it, but if we took a straw poll, I fear that the average number of children among the people here would be lower than the national average. That was the second point. And yeah, the third point is completely different. Your point of view is very interesting, and you interpret, and this is a bit Nietzschean, religion have this function or this function for survival. But it's a little bit personal, so you don't have to answer this at all. But what makes your heart beat? I mean, what is that you no longer stand above it and say this is the social function of this religion, this is the social function of this political association? What instinctively, subjectively, for what does your heart beat? Or are you always coldly, scientifically analyzing the functions, the utilitarian purpose of every religious or political association?
Right. So your first question was about the desirability of intelligence. I agree with you that there are, above a certain level of intelligence, there seems to be some evidence that there are problems. So people that are very, very highly intelligent, the different components of intelligence become less strongly correlated at very high levels of intelligence, which means that the people that are super clever can be brilliant at physics, but rubbish at like everyday things which are weakly correlated with intelligence. Like lots of people I know that are super intelligent can't drive. In fact, one person I know that's probably the most intelligent person I know, when I asked him, can you drive? He said, goodness me, no. It's the kind of thing one's parents should do. And he's in his late 30s, and AJ knows who I mean. And so such people can be, and the other things that are weakly associated with intelligence are things like being socially skilled, being altruistic, all these kinds of things. And so people that are super intelligent can be bad at those things. They can also be very hyper, almost like autistic traits, because you solve problems better if you take in lots of information. So you become sensitive to noise, sensitive to smell, sensitive to whatever. And so there are, I agree with you, bad things about too much intelligence. And indeed, you become sort of low in instinct almost. You become less instinctive. And this may be why people that are highly intelligent often don't want to have children. And so in that sense, people that are highly intelligent are the ultimate, they don't want to have children, but maybe they're asexual or something. So I agree with you. Secondly, with regard to runaway individualism, yeah, you're quite right. Life could get much more individualistic than it is, which, I mean, God, that'd be awful. But I think you have runaway individualism in the sense that we're now so individualistic that the dominant ideology, which is based around these individualistic values, that's what I mean by individualism, of harm avoidance and of equality promotion, are so extreme that it's promoting that we should just destroy ourselves, basically. And so in that sense, I mean, it's kind of got out of control. It's run away. I mean, there was a person that was sacked today or yesterday from Georgetown University for listening to another person say that in her experience, black people do less well in her law classes than white people. And that person, for listening to that being said, was sacked. Right? That's runaway individualism. As for the zombie apocalypse, I would argue that those zombies, they don't create like complex societies where they love each other and stuff. So, and that's what I mean by people that are group oriented, that they create these complex societies where they love each other and bond and invest energy in. That's what group oriented people do. They don't do that. They're individualists in a herd in that sense. I see it's a paradox, but they're quite if they beat each other up very quickly and lose temper with each other very quickly if the time came. So it's like dogs, you know, being in a pack, but individualistic in a sense. As for the children thing and how many of us have kids, well, perhaps it could be argued that many people here are childless and operating at the group level, operating at what AJ calls the level of multi-level selection, and like sort of shamans, and are trying to pass on their genes indirectly. I don't know, but I don't know about that. And as for what makes my heart beat, as you say, I suppose it's just a sort of autistic desire to understand the nature of what goes on around me. I want to know what's happening, and I like having a project where I'm understanding something, where I'm comprehending something, where I'm making sense of something. And I didn't find my raison d'etre until I was in my early 30s, and I fully embraced evolutionary psychology, and I met wonderful, sexy people like AJ and his ideas. But so it makes, I had all these things I wrote about Finnish culture or about the fundamentalist Christians and all this, but through sociological theories and these anthropological theories, but there was always things missing, always things that didn't quite make sense. And I found that it's getting it down to the science, that's what ties the loose ends together and makes it all make sense, and that's what I've been at ever since, and so that's what I really enjoy doing, making sense of something, and the more controversial it is, the better. Because if people tell you, "Oh, you shouldn't touch this because it's controversial," well, that's probably where new truths are to be found. And last week I was in northern Lapland with my sister-in-law's house, and my family went off skiing, and I was more than happy to just sit there writing my new book. That's enjoyment for me.
Edward, I think you are a perfect example of that way towards union with the divine, which in Hinduism is called jnana yoga, the kind of the way of knowledge, whereby through one's mind one engages with divine reality. I think. I think Lexi, please. Hello.
Hi. Just to say, big fan of Stead and big fan of Ed. So really great to see you two together. And also thanks to Ed for teaching my 2-year-old son how to say thank you very much, goodbye. He says that all the time now after watching The Jolly Heretic. Just a really quick question, not an academic one. Have you ever heard of the anthropologist Robert Zephyr? And if you had, would it be someone you would have on The Jolly Heretic?
I have to say I haven't heard of him. I will look into him, and I will consider that.
An anthropologist, but of a different sort. He talks a lot about Atlantis on his YouTube videos, and he's got a book out about the real society and Atlantis and things like that. So I think it would be really good to sort of.
Are you from where I was at university? Are you from County Durham or somewhere like that?
I'm from Newcastle. Well, I'm half Norwegian and grew up in Newcastle. So yeah.
Newcastle, okay.
Lovely to hear your voice again, Lexi. I should never forget your reading of Heidegger in the Swedish Seamen's Church at one of our blogs. So yeah.
Was that memorable? Thank you.
Yeah, and regards to Sean, and we'd be nice to meet up in the future. I think, Mikhail, if it's a short question, we'll end with that. Hello.
Well, I said it in the comments that I find that Edward's notion of religion is too narrow, because Buddhism is definitely a religion, but believes in no God. And also, in one of his videos, he criticized the woke people, and he said that there is no self, and that's, I felt like he said it in a manner that to believe that there is no self is a bad thing, or in such a way. At least that's how I felt it. But Buddhism is perfectly fine with believing that there is no self, and it's a completely meaningful religion. And even many Western thinkers thought in this way. For example, Heraclitus, his way of thinking is very similar to Buddhism. And it's very important to understand that we are in the context of the West, and we were strongly influenced by Aristotelian logic. And before him, Heraclitus had a completely different type of logic, which was described by Kitaro Nishida in his work, The Religious Worldview and the Logic of the Place of Nothingness, where he describes the so-called logic of contradictory identity. And this type of logic can be used to understand different, or it's a completely different worldview and religiosity itself. So, and
it's a good point.
Well, if I may have some room, I just want to read two. It's about 3 sentences, and to sort of dispel something, or it's just for interest, let's say. And I really like this passage, and I hope, and I want to see if you can guess who wrote this. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its context. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but someday the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age.
Yeah, sorry, it's 11:10 here. I've got to go to bed soon. But as for the question on the issue of self, what I said was that the people who engage in postmodern philosophy or whatever, they say there's no such thing as truth. That's what I said. No such thing as truth. And I said that the Aristotelian idea is that there is a sort of an essence, an essential you. Now, whether that you also in a sort of Neoplatonic idea kind of flows into the whole is a separate issue for me. And I'm aware that in a lot of religions and religious experiences in different religions, people say they have this feeling of being part of something greater and part of the whole. So I don't know if that's a contradiction. As for Buddhism, I did say that though you might have an archetype of religion, let's say the collective worship of a moral god or gods, then there can be different components of religion. There can be deviations from that. And I would see Buddhism as having almost everything in common with a religion, except for the belief in God, where that's replaced with fate. And it's not alone in that. So I see that basically pretty much with any category you get those that are on the borders of it, and Buddhism would be that. And also in my experience of Buddhism, such as Buddhism in Sri Lanka, it tends to be syncretized with elements of paganism, so that the people that are Buddhists kind of believe in gods anyway, because they syncretize Buddhism with other things. So that even not so much pure Buddhists. So I had a supervisor for my PhD, and his research was with Tibetan Buddhists, Tibetan Buddhist monks. And even there was elements of syncretization. But I don't disagree that Buddhism is a religion.
No, that was a good question. And who was the quote by Mikhail before I closed?
Oh, it's by H.P. Lovecraft.
H.P. Lovecraft. Oh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Excellent.
Got it.
Well done. Ed, you've been very, very gracious answering so many questions of all sorts, and you've been very generous with your time. I think we're all very grateful for that. I'll just say a couple of words, blow out the candle, and we can all go and have some dinner. Att kväll ska det gå för konwe bränd Maak je ronde mooie gewinnen, Ise ieder kenner, ul cricket of at not skal road. Figure either, figure either, figure off, figure off, figure either, figure either, figure off. Hello there. To repeat myself, thank you so much for making this Moot such a stimulating occasion. And thanks everyone who stayed to this point for asking questions or listening with interest to how Ed has answered other people's questions, which is all added to the atmosphere of the evening. And the next meeting, the next Moot will be on the 7th of April, later time, 8:15 in the evening, with AJ, who will be continuing this general theme. So it'd be nice if you're able to join us, Edward. That would be good. With that, perhaps everyone wanted to say goodbye, and I shall close the meeting. For those who are interested, there will be a bloat for the equinox this Sunday at 11:45, 12 noon GMT, when we can celebrate the equality of lightness and darkness, which would be nice. All right then, thanks very much.
Thank you, Ed.
Yes,
goodbye, Ed. Thanks
Bye-bye.
everyone so much.
Bye bye.
Folks, bye.
Bye bye.
Bye everyone.
Bye bye.